the Boston ecosystem is always regretting that they've sort of lost these companies. So I think the same way India has to make sure it doesn't lose its entrepreneurs, and the way to do that is to give them the freedom to innovate. Celebrate entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is everyone should long-term be an entrepreneur. Balaji had a great vision of how everyone should be able to everyone who has a phone should be able to get a job through the phone. I think it's, there's one level beyond that comes after that, which is everyone has a phone should be a creator through the phone. And that's what platforms are enabling. That's what the social media revolution is about. You can be a podcaster, you can be an author, you can be a tweeter, you can be a clubhouser, you can be a developer, you can create products, you can sell products. There's the old famous New Yorker cartoon with a dog on the internet and on the computer, and he says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Well, yeah, on the internet, nobody knows who you are, where you are, what you are. All they care about is your output. And that is incredibly liberating for a country that's so large and has such a good English-speaking population, that I think that, India can win. It just has to it has to remove shackles. There's nothing to add. There are things to take away that are in the way of people who want to create things. Celebrate creators, enable creators.
That's right. And I think, so that relates actually to another question here by Vishesh, who asks, right now, SaaS startups are big in India, like Katabook and Puggerbook, but do you think we need technology startups in India like OpenAI, crypto, and VR? Also, how do we come up with new technologies like these? So for those of you who don't know, Katabook and Puggerbook are like, payroll management and personal ledgers. So here's the thing, Elon Musk got started with Zip2. Right. And there's absolutely no shame whatsoever. In fact, there's good things in doing the blocking and tackling SaaS company. If that's your passion, or if that's what you're good at, you should go after that. And there's no shame in it whatsoever. You don't have to try to, push the frontier of AI. In fact, if you get a win under your belt and you've got some capital, then it makes it easier to take a bigger swing with the next one. Go ahead.
For a second, it was just a few examples. Sam Altman, before he did OpenAI, I think his previous company, he was president of YC before that, but his company before that was Looped, which was the locality social network. Balaji already gave the example of Elon Musk before he did Tesla and SpaceX. He did Zip2, which was like an online Yellow Pages. Boom Aerospace, the founder Blake Scholl, before he did that, he was doing a commerce-based iPhone app. Kyle Voigt, who did Cruise, before he did that, he was doing Twitch. So it's a natural progression for entrepreneurs, and I would argue even for investors, which I'm seeing myself, is we all start out doing the quote-unquote easy stuff, the financial stuff, the SaaS, the consumer plays, etc. But eventually we get bored of that. We all want to do something bigger with our lives. And so that's when we start going into rocketry and aircraft and crypto and VR and so on, and AI. And so I think this is a natural progression. You just got to work your way up the chain, do all the SaaS stuff to your heart's content, make a lot of money, gain a lot of expertise, and then go looking for meaning. And then you'll create the next level things.
I think that's right. And I think in particular, there's just zero shame in doing the basic India clones. That's fine. Go and do that. Knock yourself out. Execute on that if you're good at execution. And then the next step will be obvious once you've got that first win. And that first win is actually pretty hard to get. So don't underrate it.
Yeah, I was saying it's funny because right now there's like that, dude, where's my flying car meme, which is like we were promised flying cars, but instead we got 280 characters or 140 characters. And there's some truth to that, but at the same time, we're going to get our flying cars. Hey, we have drones that are flying overhead. How long before those things are carrying larger and larger payloads? Will it carry humans all the way? Maybe not, but there's lots of other electric plane companies coming. We have electric cars, we have rockets. If you can look at like Bird and Lime and so on, that electric scooter revolution, that's a bigger deal than people think. I mean, one of the big problems with a developing country like India is you just have horrible pollution and traffic. But you can see how over time that in the West, a lot of non-electric vehicles are being replaced by electric vehicles not because they're cooler or necessarily even energy saving, or cleaner, they're being replaced just for performance and cost reasons. And so eventually that will trickle down, and you will see in India a lot of these two-stroke engine-based, scooters that are very polluting will eventually be replaced by electric scooters or electric bikes, just because those will be the cheapest things and the easiest to maintain because they don't have a lot of moving parts, and you don't have to stop and refuel them all the time. They're always ready to go because you just plug them in overnight. So I think you're going to see that within a decade, a lot of these problems will start clearing up. And it's just kind of the nature of technology to kind of always keep up leveling. So it's fine to start where you are.
Yeah, so it's absolutely right. So, okay, here's another question, which is, given the size of India's creator market, this is by Harsha, given the size of India's creator market, do you see tokenization in digital goods working in India, especially the long tail? Well, so, I mean, as we've said a few times, like the fact that India, took a sort of rearward-looking view on crypto has unfortunately set India back on this. And that does need to be, like further addressed. But broadly speaking, I do think that digital everything will work in India. Rajiv Mantri's posted some great charts of UPI just going vertical. But what's interesting is yes, of course, India is an important market and it's an important source of users, but I'm actually most interested in India as a workforce, right, on the producer side rather than the consumer side, because I think that's actually where the maximum arbitrage is. You have all of these really smart people who are finally able to contribute on, the global internet and get paid for it. And then on the other side, you've got the folks who can outsource the work or remote the work because you can put it overseas. And so that is something where there's $1 trillion arbitrage to be done there. So India's market is important, but India's workforce I think is even more important. Naval, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was actually thinking we can kind of switch formats here. We've been here for an hour, and we're talking and reading stuff off of the Google spreadsheet forms. But maybe it's fun just to start inviting a few people up, let them talk for 30 seconds, and then bounce them back, and then we'll decide whether we want to answer or not.
Great. Go ahead.
I want to do a little high risk, so I'm just going to randomly invite people up. You're going to get exactly 30 seconds, and then unfortunately, I'm going to bounce you even if you're in mid-sentence.
Go for it.
All right, the whole thing is flashing by. Why don't you invite someone, anyone that catches your eye? I'll let you choose first victim.
Okay, 1 sec.
Jesus, there's a lot of people raising their hands. All right, 30 seconds, go. Avery, you're on the air.
Yes. Sorry, what should I say?
Ask your question. You raised your hand, right?
Yes. Trying to think of an insight. Oh, I have one. So here's a question that I ask all of our podcast guests for my podcast called the Overview Effect. So I'm just curious, what does the overview effect mean to you and why?
Okay, that doesn't apply to us. Thank you for playing. So that doesn't make sense. That was good, clever marketing for your podcast, but we're not falling for it. Kushi, you're on the air. 30 seconds, go.
What's your take on the farmers' protest happening in India, especially with your interest in going into India?
All right, good question. I'm going to move you to the audience. Thank you. Unfortunately, I have no idea. I don't follow geopolitics. I can rarely be bothered to follow politics in the United States. It's nauseating and difficult and hard, and one has to stick to their sphere of competence. So I don't know. Balaji, you know anything about the farmers' protests? I admit to being completely clueless, and I'm proud of it.
I don't have a position. I haven't followed it very closely, unfortunately.
All right, Kurt, your 30 seconds of infamy. Go.
How can a 45-year-old guy move to India and still be able to take risks, having a family to support behind?
All right, interesting question. I'm going to move you to the audience. Interesting. I would say that's a tough one, but actually I think my dad came to the United States. I don't remember what age he was, and I'd have to do the math, but, probably not much younger than that. So took risks. At least the old model used to be that if you switch countries, you basically trashed your career in life and sort of had to start over, but you gave your kids like an incredible springboard. So, our parents and generations like that made the ultimate sacrifice. Well, if you're also talking about tech, like tech is, this is not talked about a lot, but tech is a very ageist industry. People talk about discrimination in tech. You want to see discrimination in tech? Try applying as an older person to a job. Holy hell. So I don't think it will be easy. My guess is that the best way to do that is to do that as a representative of some kind of a US or Silicon Valley based company that is high quality and expanding out into India. So at least you come bearing a calling card, you have some safety net to fall back upon, you have some legitimacy, you get some network to start out, and then you kind of network your way out from there. But I don't think that's an easy one. You picked yourself a hard one. All right, Keith, your 30 seconds, go.
Hi, Balaji. Hi, Naval. Thanks for this. The Indian diaspora is quite global. And you mentioned a couple of countries throughout this hour. I mean, are you looking at sort of investing in Indians, particularly India, or you don't care? I'm just kind of riff on that a bit, if you don't mind. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Going to move you out. I don't care Indian, not Indian, where they are, where they aren't. India, I'm not doing Indian investment because, like, for some patriotic, nationalistic reason. I mean, sure, there's probably a little element of that, but I don't want to overplay it. India just has a lot of really smart English-speaking people from a culture that I'm familiar with, and it is probably going to be the most ascendant country in the world over the next few decades, both through a combination of improving policy, capitalism, rule of law, sheer numbers, English-speaking, STEM education, and just raw ambition. So I think India's in a good trajectory. Now, would I invest in like an Indian entrepreneur elsewhere? Sure. But you would have to factor in what country they're in. Like, for example, if they're in one of the Middle Eastern countries that are not known for supporting innovation, then it's going to be a much, much harder bet. So each case is unique. Balaji, you have any thoughts on that, or should we just go to the next one? All right, I'm just going to keep going. Balaji, you stop me if you want to say something. All right, Anand, you got 30 seconds. Let's do this.
So you guys have a very good and unique backgrounds, and you guys became these popular figures, but if you were somebody like me coming from a very middle-class background from India, but you have a deep passion for solving climate change, you don't have a huge network to do it, you don't have a huge capital, you don't have a rich family to back you up or any sort of access to it, how would you go about solving that?
All right, I'm going to move to the audience. That just seemed like a litany of excuses. No offense, but like if you knew where Balaji or I started from, none of us had network or capital or anything. We had literally nothing. And networks are irrelevant. Capital is irrelevant. People talk about like the reason to become a billionaire so you can like change the world and implement your agenda. That's BS. What changes the world are ideas. What changes the world are compelling people with compelling ideas. It's not money. Most billionaires are boring. They don't even know what to do with their money. Most billionaires look at they're buying like basketball teams or they're going on CNBC. That to me is a complete waste of time. That's not changing the world. Ideas are what change the world. Have a great idea and execute. What separates the winners from the losers, the people who deserve to get backing, is the ones who execute. If you're executing and you're doing a good job, people will back you. I mean, if you care about climate change, then start working on it. Do something, and don't just complain. Don't just be an activist. Like, actually do something. Like Nassim Taleb says, you must become an entrepreneur. It is the moral thing to do. Who's done more to solve climate change than anybody else? I would argue it's Elon Musk. He did things. So go do something. Next, Amog, 30 seconds of fame.
Hi. So what's your take on data annotation or data generation for AI as a source of income for millions of people? Especially for NLP, because language is something that everybody knows, right? Balaji spoke about jobs reaching you on your smartphone. It's just that what if those jobs are micro jobs? For example, describe what you see in this image, right? And then that data is used for training AI.
Let me take this.
Sure.
I'm a huge believer in this. I did earn.com, and if you've seen scale.ai, which is doing very well, and Cameo is also like a different kind of microtasking thing. I think tasking is going to be not $1 billion but $1 trillion probably this decade, where basically the combination of the work plus the search algorithm to find the person who can do the work plus the crypto or digital currency to pay them is going to be huge. And I also agree that essentially labeling and training machine learning algorithms is like the new white collar, blue collar job. We might come up with some name for it, but because anybody can do it with zero skill from anywhere in the world, you should be able to actually scale that out everywhere, and then you can make some money by doing that, and then level up and potentially get more skills. So I'm a huge believer in this. By the way, before I couldn't unmute because we were getting so many notifications that I couldn't even hit the unmute button. But go ahead.
That's hilarious. I would add to that, I would say it's a great way to start, but my definition of a shitty job is one where a computer's telling you what to do, and a good job is where you're telling a computer what to do. So even though you can start out by taking orders from a computer, eventually you better learn how to give orders to a computer. And the way to do that is by being creative, by understanding code and mathematics. So, don't skip arithmetic day. All right.
Agree with that.
Anwar, you're up. 30 seconds, please. Thank you.
Hi, Naval. Hi, Balaji. Naval, you mentioned investing in deep tech, and recently I've been obsessed with nanotechnology, and I've been confused as to why it hasn't been getting the attention I think it deserves, considering the potential of it. So I'm curious to hear both of your opinions of it, and kind of as an industry as a whole.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead. You go first.
Well, so the thing is, there's nanotechnology in like the narrow sense, which is the Eric Drexler sense, and then what happened was that sort of got co-opted by everybody who started rebranding, let's say, biochemistry as nanotechnology, and so on. And of course, it is true that there are macromolecules and there are biochemical processes that you can characterize as molecular machines. It is true. You look at the motions of some of these proteins, and they look like small machines. But I do think that the space it became sort of a buzzword, and then it became something that people sort of rolled their eyes at. That also happened to neural networks, by the way, for a while. But I think that you could go and revisit that and actually think about some of those ideas. Feynman's famous talk on how there's plenty of room at the bottom. I still think there's tons of potential there, but you'd want to sort of get past the rebranding of, let's say, biochemistry as nanotechnology in order to get there.
Yeah, I think nanotech is a space that historically attracts a lot of charlatans and fakers and big talkers and visionaries, and has accomplished very little. Most of the actual work that's been done in nanotech has been in material science or biochemistry. The reality, nanotech rests on a couple of assumptions, but let's just go through two of them. One of them is that machines at a small scale will behave like machines at a large scale, which is just not true. Once you reduce things down to molecular level, all kinds of forces come into play that make it very hard to organize and make things stick together. And the second is that we can build replicators at a small scale. We can't even build replicators at a large scale. There is no machine out there that will build more of itself. It doesn't exist other than humans, living organisms, right? We haven't been able to build a machine at a macro scale. Why do we think we can build replicators and jump straight ahead to a micro scale where it's much, much harder because of stiction and various effects and forces that come into play at those levels? So I think that space has just attracted a lot of charlatans. Not to say that there hasn't been real work done, but it is so far and few between that I fear they've trashed their reputation for decades to come. And real nanotech innovation will come from some other field, some other group of people who don't call themselves nanotech people. All right, Sonia, you're up. 30 seconds.
Hey, Naval. Hey, Balaji. Okay, so my quick question is that, somebody who's in the audio industry and somebody who's been producing a lot of audio content for brands, and now looking at apps like Clubhouse and so many others pop up in the audio first space, what do you see is the future of audio? And if I could actually go a little deeper, maybe podcasting as well, what do you see will be the future of this industry?
I think podcasting and audio first is going to be monstrous. It's going to be huge. It's going to be much, much, much bigger than people realize. Podcasting has already become so mainstream that you could argue that more people get their news and opinions and kind of their daily talk show content out of podcasts than they do out of television. Certainly for people who are smart and on the ball, that's already true. And podcasting is just massive. Now, something like Clubhouse, I think could be even quite a bit bigger. And the reason is, why am I on Clubhouse instead of doing a podcast right now? It's interactive. It's so easy to create the content. It's so easy to interact with the audience. It's so easy to build followers, so easy to publish, so easy to have conversation, community. Clubhouse is probably the first time on the internet where I have seen instant community building form. I credit my brother Kamal, who's floating somewhere in the audience, for this observation, but he was like, wow, people are actually meeting with each other and hanging out, and they're going through the full range of emotions, and they're connecting with each other. That's huge. If this was video, would we be doing this? Probably not. You have to get the lighting right. Like, how does my hair look? What am I wearing? Oh my God, what time is it? It's dark over here. It's light over there. Do we have the bandwidth for this? Even Zoom feels very, very heavyweight towards this. So I don't think platforms like Clubhouse are sort of like a, one of yet another platform. I think these are going to be mega platforms. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, this is going to sound insane, but I wouldn't be surprised if Clubhouse actually ends up bigger than TikTok. Why? Because TikTok, although it's video and it's fun, it's engaging, a lot of people consume it. The difference is TikTok is still very hard to create. The barrier to entry to create on TikTok is very high. You walk into a Clubhouse, anyone can jump into a room, start chatting with people. If they have something interesting to say, somebody else can jump in. Now, it's hard to create compelling content. The number of people who can riff extemporaneously on many, many topics and kind of be interesting to listen to is not that large. So there is a power law distribution in the outcomes of people that you want to listen to. But it is much more of a level playing field than almost anything else. You can kind of jump in on a whim and create content, and people can connect and communicate with each other in a way that they just can't elsewhere. So I think the opportunity as a new person coming up and deciding, like, where do I want to build an audience? Like, I would argue that today that place is Clubhouse and podcasting. Those are probably the best venues. Podcasting, what I love about it is it's open, right? You can't get deplatformed. You can't get kicked off. You can run your own advertising. You can publish across many, many formats. Clubhouse is obviously more controlled and more limited, but on the other hand, Clubhouse, like Twitter, is a place where you can explosively grow. You can talk to people. You can have rich profiles. The publishing is so trivial. The content creation is so trivial. I think these are like the best platforms to build followers on. All right. Balaji, if you have anything to add, just jump in. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep hammering people.
Totally.
Awesome.
I'm trying to manage the queue here. So
awesome. All right, let's do it. Adam, you're up. 30 seconds. Go.
Yeah, all right. Hey, what's up, Naval, Balaji? Thanks for doing this. So this was regarding the point earlier. You guys said that India will be the largest beneficiary of remote work. I'm curious as to what you guys think this means for competition in America. As the world globalizes, obviously crypto plays a role. Where you work doesn't really matter. So how does this fare from a regulatory standpoint? Do companies begin to ignore borders? If life becomes on-chain like Uniswap, et cetera, and everything becomes independent of jurisdiction almost, what does the future of power look like in the world? Does this accelerate crypto? Does this impact world peace? Hiring people is cheaper. So, how would all that work out?
All right, the future of humanity in 30 seconds. I don't know.
Sure.
I would just say that I think that workers who are kind of sitting on their butts and counting on even in the tech business, there are people who are sort of, we call them vesting in peace, VIPs. They're sort of just hanging out, investing their stock. That is going away. It is becoming a more competitive environment. So what happened, what tech did to other industries by forcing people to be more meritocratic and to produce or to lose, is happening within the tech industry itself. No longer are you guaranteed a job as a software engineer that's high paying just because you moved to Silicon Valley.
Let me give the flip side of that, which is, yes, it is true there's more competition. It's also true that tech and crypto are going to organically diversify the workforce because there's all these really smart people around the world, in India, of course, but in Nigeria, in Brazil, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, really smart people who have been held back by bad governments. And now that we can go remote, we can find them, we can fund them, we can give them work, we can have them level up and have them, assume their rightful place in the world. And I deeply believe in that. I believe in that kind of equality of opportunity. I believe in funding that. That's the kind of thing that gets me up in the morning. And so I think there's a real moral imperative here as well that's important to talk about.
Yeah, I also think you can start getting into all these details about, or all these high level conjectures about what does this mean for the nature of power. It's just way too abstract. That's masturbation about macro issues. Nobody knows. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. There's good and bad going at the same time. Tend to your own garden, look at the thing in front of you, and build that version of the world where you have some influence and control, and the macro is going to play out the way the macro is going to play out. You can sit around thinking about it all day, but since you have no influence over it, it's just another form of daydreaming and wasting time. Chaitanya, you're up.
Hi, Naval. Hi, Balaji. I had a question for both of y'all. So there is no easy and serendipitous way to meet people and form these deep, meaningful connections, right? So I wanted to ask y'all, what is your take on, would a idea such as Tinder for startup folks work, right? And I'm asking that because I run Intro, which plans to kind of do that.
So that's interesting. So basically, like founder dating. The thing about this is, I'm neutral on this, where it's the kind of thing that it's probably beyond where I do at the stage of my career, but for young people, it might work. It's it's the kind of thing where it's hard to assess compatibility with somebody on something like a company until you've actually worked together on something. And so even like a few days project or a few weeks project is something where you can see whether you can divide up labor properly. And it's just different than just a friend relationship, because the other person has to deliver their stuff on time and so on and so forth. So if you're doing any kind of Tinder for startups like thing, it can't simply just be surfing somebody's profile. I think you really do want to have some sort of joint project of some kind that they do, even if it's small, to help both parties, get that. And ideally, it's real money, but it's low stakes, and I'm not sure that's being systematized, but whether it's a cloud kitchens thing or whether it's a microsite, something along those lines might be the right way of trying to make the first dollar together over the course of a few weeks or a month before doing a bigger project. Naval, your thoughts?
I completely agree. I think if this thing actually looks like Tinder, where you're swiping around looking at startups, then you're wasting your time. That's not going to work. First of all, the atomic object of a startup is too large. As an atomic object, that's too big. You want to operate the level of a person. It's people who build things, not startups. Startups are like an abstract concept that we put around it so that we can have corporate relationships and contracts. But people don't actually work with startups. They work with other people. They don't found companies with startups. They found with other people. So it's really about people connection. So it kind of depends on how you're going about it. If you're creating clubhouse rooms where people are hanging out and meeting and riffing and then going off and doing projects and hackathons, that might work, maybe. I don't know. Is that a product? Is that scalable? Who knows? That's the tough part. But if it's just like a website where startups are browsing and clicking yes or no, that's not going to work. I guarantee that part.
Yeah, and one thought on this, by the way, is, for a long time, people were wondering what's going to be the Facebook for work. And, Yammer did fine. It was $1 billion, more than fine. It was $1 billion acquisition by Microsoft, and that had a sort of Facebook-like UX for work. But it turned out that Facebook for work didn't look like Facebook. It looked like Slack, because it was much more heavy on text and to-dos and much lighter on visuals and images. And it was just a different thing. It was more like IRC 2.0 than Facebook 2.0.
Right, and it didn't need a social graph. The social graph was the company. It was already
correct. That's right. So basically going from first principles, what I think, now just thinking about it a little bit, while Tinder for startups makes sense from the standpoint of just instantly communicating the concept of founder dating, I think something like Gitcoin, Gitcoin, that's the kind of thing where I could imagine, quote, organic founder dating happening, where there's public tasks, they're paid in crypto, and people work together on them to do them. And they're relatively small in terms of their scale, and you can get together with somebody organically. You can see if they can execute. That's the kind of thing where the organic unit is sort of work, as opposed to the swiping between profiles. Just to give you a sense, like the analogy of what Slack was actually Facebook for work. It didn't look like Facebook. Okay.
All right, Trevor, you look suspiciously non-Indian, but go. 30 seconds.
Thanks, Naval. For people that are kind of super long India, like everyone in this call seems to be, but have none of the relevant, as you pointed out, kind of background or cultural understanding of India. How do we? Americans are so used to people wanting to work with us that I think sometimes it's nice to turn the tables to understand how can we make it easier for other people. And so, for someone that doesn't have any of that sort of that knowledge or background, what would you say?
Well, okay. When the pandemic is over, get on the plane and go to India. I mean, that would be the start, I would think. If you have something to offer, go offer it in India. I don't know. I don't think there's a macro answer here. I think it's micro to each person. But I would argue that you just have to jump into it. Action bias. The biggest problem just in career building is not taking the wrong action. It's just not taking action. I think more people fail because of analysis paralysis, which is really just a form of procrastination, than because they do the wrong thing. Doing the wrong thing is fine as long as you're error correcting. Every interesting system in society works through error correction. Markets work through error correction. Prices bounce up and down until you find an equilibrium. Evolution works through error correction. You have variation, and then natural selection calls out the variation that was incorrect. Innovation works through error correction. You try lots of things, and there's trial and error. Even scientific theories are formed through conjecture and criticism. So error correction is the whole thing. So you just have to constantly be moving. So if you want to go help Indians or Indian startups, you want to get in the Indian startup scene, then I would argue just go to India.
Yeah, I'd say something else, which is so that's good advice once the pandemic is over, if it's over. I say if, because, mutant viruses.
Yeah, they're addicted to lockdowns now. It's like the new normal.
Yeah.
3 weeks to cut. Remember, what week are we in to flatten the curve? I thought it was supposed to be 3 weeks, but never mind.
Well, it's been flattened in the sense of if you go to Google and you search COVID-19 deaths worldwide, you see it's flattened to between 5,000 to 11,000 deaths per day. So I'm not sure if that's what people envision. But, I'd say there's something else that you could do, Trevor, intermediate, which is find the intersection between your current interests, like tech and so on, and then, the folks in India you want to get in touch with, and then just start building bridges off of Twitter. The main thing is there's a 12-hour or 10.5-hour time difference between the West Coast, so that's one thing to be conscious of. But outside of that, I think you can do a lot online and just start, building, bridges to those communities. That's how I would do it, at least. Okay, Peter.
Hello, gentlemen.
Peter Berg. How are you?
It's nice to
enjoying San Francisco.
I'm not there at the moment, so
okay, good for you.
Can't speak to that.
well done.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation.
Another refugee.
Again. It's, more or less. Topic for another time. So new year, new man, Naval. But you've said somewhat in the past. You never want to find yourself a year later doing the same thing or capable of the same things as you were a year ago. So I'm curious, what is it that you're capable of today that you weren't maybe capable of a year ago? And if you want an extra credit follow-up, I'm curious what the biggest lie is that you think you or we collectively tell ourselves most often.
Okay, I'll take the biggest lie first. I think the biggest lie that we collectively tell ourselves all the time is that we're doing it for other people, whereas I think most people are just, not just most, basically everyone is behaving selfishly all the time. And I think the sooner you acknowledge that, the better decisions you will make. And you may help other people as a byproduct of that, but even at some core level, if you're helping someone, you're helping them because it makes you feel good. And so, again, you're doing it for you. And that may seem like a pedantic definition, but I think it's important to kind of just keep in mind that you're doing things because you want to do them. You're kind of exactly where you want to be in life because you've made certain choices that are keeping you there. And so just this whole exercise that we go through where we're constantly pretending that we're doing it for the greater good, to look good to each other actually leads us astray, and it makes us unhappy, and then we sit around wondering why. And the irony is I think you can do the greatest good if you realize that you're doing it for yourself, and then you kind of make yourself happy, and the process you'll realize that the best way to make yourself happy is to do things that are congruent with your true nature, and most people are good people, so you'll end up doing the right things. So I think that is a really big lie. I actually think society is just collectively the set of lies that we all tell ourselves so that we can get along and not kill each other. And that's fine. We need to do that so we get along and don't kill each other. But there's a certain level of delusion that operating as a member of society implies, which is why I think the people who go the most wrong are the one who buy all of the social rules hook and sinker. If you basically followed every social rule and every social nicety and you behaved exactly how society wanted you to behave, my guess is you would be a complete and utter failure in life. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just offer, somewhat edge to that. So, or modification. The way I think about it is true, altruism is investment because you are quantifiably building up the other person. For example, if I invest in somebody, for example, anybody who invested in Paystack, which was recently acquired by Stripe, that was a $200 million acquisition in Nigeria. And you wanted the entrepreneurs who you invested in to become richer than you. And that's because you might put in 25,000, they become, multi-millionaires, and you are actually now, quote, poorer than them, but everybody became wealthier together. I think once you have a true quantifiable metric for the person who you are trying to help, that both of you agree on, and you're actually tracking that over time, that's different than sort of the virtue signaling version of, let me express compassion and not actually do something. So that's how I would, it's a slight edit to your thing, Naval, which is I don't deny that other interest, as opposed to self-interest, can exist, but that it needs to actually be quantified and measurable.
It's on the extreme to be provocative. Because
sure,
it's hard to break through the noise of the constant virtue signaling.
Yes,
and it's just when you start virtue signaling to yourself internally that you lead yourself astray a lot of times. What have I learned in the last year that I didn't know before? It's countless, man. I could just go on and on and on. But I don't want to talk about myself. That's not interesting. that's just some self-obsession, and I'm trying to get away from that.
Yeah,
it's not that I'm trying to get away from it. It's not useful.
We go to value signaling over virtue signaling. I think that's quantifiable. Mel,
I like that. That's good. That's a good line.
Hello. So at the beginning of the conversation, you said that this was kind of a sharing of established wisdom, and it made me think about, what role is the Indian education system playing in the rise of their ecosystem? So I was wondering if you had any insight into that, and maybe if they're doing something different, or if you can, that what you've seen outside of the region, and if there's any sort of obvious or not obvious levers that you think could accelerate that growth further through development of a different style of education system in the region.
One thing is, in the U.S., the term tech bro is an epithet, whereas in India, at least to my knowledge, people still value STEM education. And certainly when I was growing up, that was a very, very big deal. Part of the reason is that engineering and science and math are things that are international. But part of it's also cultural. I posted this video. If you watch the trailer for Super 30, okay, and you just watch that, you realize that, okay, that's just a completely different mental model than where the East Coast of the U.S. is, where they're trying to fight all these flaws in tech and so on, mainly because tech is competing with them. So I think there's a huge cultural difference where one civilization has seen its fortunes rising with technology, and the East Coast of the U.S. has seen the opposite, and so therefore they're structurally biased against it, whereas India is largely aligned with it. So I think that's there, and then that's upstream of everything else, including education and so on. Though, of course, the value of a technical education has been there in India for many decades. That's my take on it, with Naval's.
Yeah, I was in the Indian education system for first couple of years of my life when I was going to school in India as a little kid, and I remember it being very rigorous. I remember it being very focused on learning and very education system. I don't know how it is today. Obviously, every school is different. But my sense is that the rigor and the competitiveness and the determination is fantastic. It's good preparation for being on the global stage. Now, you have to do that in such a way, though, that you don't stifle creativity. And I think that's where East Asia, which also has a very rigorous education system, sometimes falls down, because their societies are much more around harmony and fitting in and everyone being the same. And unfortunately, even the U.S. seems to be moving towards that, where it's now a group thing on campuses. You're allowed to say whatever you want as long as it's the exact same thing that everybody else is saying. So I think the U.S. system used to be maybe not as rigorous, but would attract the best and brightest from the rest of the world, especially at the university level, and then it would give them creative freedom and to innovate. And I think that's kind of going away. The real challenge for Indian system would be to graduate to a point where foreigners are coming to Indian universities. That would be quite the sight to behold, because I do feel like there's a gap now forming where a lot of the American universities are being discredited because they're taking on all these fields of study that aren't serious. They're really just politics in disguise. Or they're jobs that are designed to impress by status, but not to actually build things. So if you're not learning how to build things or to fix things or make things or solve problems, then why are you going to school? You can just read a book. You can go on YouTube. You can just do it yourself online. So I feel like there's a gap in the world that is starting to slowly emerge. The cracks have formed where if you weren't getting the Harvard credential, it's not clear you would travel around halfway around the world and mortgage your life savings and then put yourself in debt for a long time to go to Harvard anymore if there was no Harvard stamp at the end of it. So I think that shows the value of the education now is more in gatekeeping and signaling. And it always has been that way, but that gap is becoming more extreme. So I do feel like there's an opportunity for another country, and India is well positioned by being English speaking and having a great IIT system and other good universities to kind of rise up and fill that gap. But that's a tall order. That's a big challenge. Let's see if that happens. I do also think a lot of education will move online, and that's really where primary education is happening. People who really want to learn, people who are really smart, they're autodidacts. They don't have to be told to go to class. They don't have to be told to take an exam. They don't care about their grades. They care about the thing itself. They care about the learning. They care about figuring out, hey, I want to know how to build that. I want to know how to solve that. I want to know how that works. So they're following their own natural, genuine intellectual curiosity. And that's really the only way to learn. And so I think most education that matters is going to move online. And offline is about credentialing. Even online, credentialing is going online. Lambda School.
I would add one thing there, only one thing, which is I don't think it'd be so much Americans coming to Indian universities. I think linking to that earlier thing, we would build something global that, maybe had Indians as a big component of it, but that everybody would go to it. So I think that would be the right approach as opposed to...
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, you're right. Future emerging university and education is all going to be online. But it'll probably start with a lot of Indians. Wherever you find a successful education system online, I wouldn't be surprised if the plurality, the single largest nation state that's represented are Indians.
That's right. And I think it's interesting. I saw this comment on Reddit a while ago where just, some kid in college was remarking how the way that they figured out what was actually going on in their lectures was finding a YouTube with an Indian person explaining it. And I laughed because I was like, oh, that's an interesting generalization that seems to be common, among a lot of college students nowadays. So I think you're right. India culturally values education, is going to be a big player here, and that's going to be a big part of the near-term future. Linda.
Thank you for this conversation. I'm joining from Kenya in Africa, and there's a lot of Indian, influence in education. Lawyers train in India, and also a lot of medical tourism goes to India. And so I have two questions. One is on, lawyers in the Bitcoin space. What would you recommend for a lawyer what meaningful contribution would they make in the crypto space? And two, there are a lot of Africans on this call, and I know the interest, especially from the African startup ecosystem. You compared Brazil and Nigeria, and I'm just wondering what contribution could be made around remote work from Africa as you tie it in with what's happening in India. I'd really love the comparison as you made of India between 2000 and comparing it to the US ecosystem. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
So
go ahead, Balaji.
Yeah, I'll respond to both this. So going to the second one first, I think, the global smartphone build out is important because that's what gives everybody, the smartphone as a skyhook, that gives everybody this individual opportunity to at least plug into the global conversation and figure out, where their skills and talents are best suited. So that's like V1. So if people don't have a smartphone, that's the very first thing to do. Then like V2 is, making sure connectivity is good, making sure that, that there's folks there who they have laptops or Chromebooks or whatever the cheapest kind of thing is. These are the obvious basics. Beyond that point, I think a very important thing that's just opened up is time zone arbitrage. And so by that, what I mean is, it used to be that historically latitudes were kind of how the world was organized because you could farm similar crops at similar latitudes. People talked about warm water versus cold water ports. It was very strategically important for Russia, for example, to have, a warm water port. That's why the Black Sea was important to them. And that's still important. But I think another thing that's now become much more important are longitudes. This observation is not original to me, but folks can actually more easily collaborate if they're near the same longitude, plus minus 2 or 3 hours. What that means is that South America, Latin America is much more important to the U.S., places like Brazil, for example, because you can work from there while being in the same longitude as the U.S. And it means that Africa has a whole new set of opportunities where folks don't necessarily have to migrate to Europe. They can get potentially a much better job because they're on the European time zone. So I think that would be an important concept to start thinking about longitudinal arbitrage and, whether that means setting up remote work centers or marketing towards that. There's lots of different things you can do there, but that's a macro concept to dig on. And then to your first question about like kind of crypto law, I do think that the next Yale law is basically going to be something focused on smart contracts. And I think that what everybody, because what it does is just automates away so many different aspects of civil law. Rather than having an unpredictable judge, you have a very predictable compiler and a very predictable, virtual machine, whether the Ethereum virtual machine or others, that can actually execute what you're at least telling it the blockchain to do, even if that's not what you meant. And so I think one of the most important things you could do, I'm not sure if we have the exact playbook for this, is build an interface between public blockchains and your local legal system such that they're as backwards and forwards compatible as possible. Sort of like, putting things online, like taking normal multimedia and putting it online. You're putting the legal system on chain, and you're trying to essentially mold it such that it is friendly to Bitcoin, friendly to Ethereum, friendly to other public blockchains, and eventually such that what you'd actually do, and this is by 2030 or 2040, the primary vehicle would be the on-chain vehicle, and it would just have a tendril that comes down in your particular geographical location, just like the primary vehicle for a website is online, and you might print out copies in a particular geographical location. So that'd be how I think about crypto and law, where you think of crypto as primary, and then you try and figure out how to build a bridge to your local legal system. Naval, your thoughts?
Yeah, if I were in law today, I would run with open arms into the crypto ecosystem. Nobody else needs smart lawyers as much as the crypto ecosystem. Companies in crypto spend more in law with lawyers as a percentage of their fundraising than anywhere else. And a lot of that is regulations. Some of that is figuring out how to write smart contracts. And what's happening is we're going from an age in which the law was all spaghetti code written in English, developed over hundreds of years, passed down from judge to judge and ruling to ruling, and then subject to multiple interpretations, to we're trying to make it all rock solid. In fact, Nick Szabo, SCABO, who's one of the pioneers in cryptocurrency, invented BitGold, and one of the most respected cryptographers in the space, and probably created the term smart contracts. He has a legal background. He's had both a legal and a computer science background, and that's what makes him so formidable. I highly recommend that you go read his blog. It's called Unenumerated, un as in not, enumerated, ENUMERATED. And so he's a brilliant person. He writes about law, history, the origins of money, cryptography, computer science. I mean, that right there is your degree in crypto law background and governance, from which you'll be ready to then go and help crypto companies both craft smart contracts as well as navigate ever-changing regulations. By the way, just as an aside, the lawyers I know who are getting the wealthiest are the ones who've been working for the crypto companies, because they have to craft all these elaborate structures with which the companies can legally operate, and they get paid in tokens as a result. And if the company is successful, they're very successful. So I also think it can be very lucrative to be on the frontier. All right, we have a very interesting questioner coming up now. He's got a hexadecimal code for his name, seems to have some kind of security and hacking background. So color me already curious. You've got 30 seconds, go.
This is Ankit here. So thanks for doing this, Balaji. I have two questions. First is, what are the ways in which you are currently sourcing good companies to invest in from India? I mean, is Twitter the best channel, or are there other sources as well? And the second question is, what are the next top three things that need to happen for the angel investing community as such to become more mature in India? Because I think you did throw some light on this, but what are the other things?
Oops, sorry, I bounced you a little too fast. In any case, we probably shouldn't be asking 2 or 3 questions because a bunch of people. I would say, actually, let's stop adding more people to the queue because it's already getting pretty late. We want to get through everybody who's up here.
Yep.
So I'm sorry about that, folks. You can stop raising your hands. We're going to go through the current queue, and then we're done for the evening, or evening my time, afternoon India time. So I think the question was what can we do to foster the angel investing ecosystem? And what was the first one again? It's late here.
Why don't we just go with that one? I don't remember the other one, actually. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, it couldn't have been that great. Sorry, no offense. Okay. Oh, yeah. How are we sourcing companies in India? That was the question. Was it over Twitter or something else? It's through contacts. So, like in my case, it's different. One, sometimes it's Twitter. It definitely happens. But if someone sends a random tweet at you, you're just not likely to even see it. So On Twitter, it's going to be a relationship. Relationships are slow, long, painful to build. And the worst way to build a relationship is to try and build a relationship. So when someone says to me, like, hey, I want to build a relationship with you, I want to run in the other direction as fast as I can. And I think most sane people also want to do that, because we know that when someone explicitly tries to build a relationship, there's always a hidden angle or purpose, and those are not real relationships. So if it happens in Twitter, great, that's serendipitous. Believe it or not, cold emails work just fine as long as they're super high quality and they're really well written and they're compact and concise but informative and smart, and they have all the data that someone would need to assess. And then don't take it personally if they don't get back to you. I guarantee you, most good investors, if you send them a cold email and it's really well written, it has all the data, even if they don't respond, I guarantee you that most of them have actually read it. And I think this is something that entrepreneurs don't want to acknowledge. They think that the only way to get to investors is by networking, and it's actually not true. So the other way, of course, is through the network. But when I say the network, it's usually you have someone who's really trusted that you know and you like, who votes with their own money. Usually it's an angel investor who says, hey, I just put 25 or 50K into this deal. And this actually just happened. The way I got into my last two India companies is Sriram Krishnan, who used to be at Twitter and now is doing other very cool stuff. I don't know if I can out his new projects. I won't mention it, but it's a good one. He angel invested in an India-based company, and he emailed me and he said, I don't know why I did this, but I just really like the founder and I want to support the founder. And the space had me curious, so I dug in. I did a couple of Zoom calls, and then I made a commitment to invest. And then as part of that diligence that I was doing, I was talking to all the people in and around the company, and one of them was a professor who had helped develop some of the core technology. And I was talking to the professor, I was like, I really like this guy. This one's a real deal. He's really smart and really interesting, and I'm learning a lot from talking to this person. And I really just want to see him succeed in whatever he does. So I said, okay, you're an advisor to this company. What are you up to? And he said, well, I have my own company, and this is what my company is doing. So I dug into his company. I liked it enough that I ended up investing. And then from there, I'm going to slowly branch out. So it's when you wander into a new territory, you want to very carefully establish your safe zones, your exits, where you can drink the water, what food you can eat, and all that. So you're kind of scoping out the territory, and that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm basically established a foothold, and I'm slowly walking out from there.
Yeah, I would say one other thing, which is, this is something which people talk about, and it's often talked about in such a way that it sounds vacuous, but the concept of adding value, like when I was early in my career, one thing that, I realized is that even like if you put yourself in the shoes of a wealthy person or a powerful person, of any kind, most of the things in their inbox are people asking them for money or asking them for this or asking them for that. And look, that's fine. That's part of the job or whatever. It's reasonable. But what really stands out are those people who are adding value. And now you might say, well, how do you add value to someone who's a billionaire or a millionaire or whatever? Well, the answer is often just like an interesting blog post or an interesting link or a fun reply on Twitter or something like that. You basically are adding value. And so you're adding value to the interaction. That means that person wants to add value back because they may be really rich or powerful or whatever, but they're still human beings. And so just that concept of going in, and of course that also flips onto the investor side as well. The reason that VCs always talk about, how can I help and, adding value is because, from the VC perspective, investment is often quasi commodity. And so it's only if you're adding value that it's, that your check is valuable, right? And so that just concept is very simple. It's often, there's people who will dismiss it or mock it or whatever, but adding value is really important. And that's the best way to break into any areas, not to quote, build a relationship, but figure out how you can add value to that person. Just to give one example, something that somebody did a while back ago is they made really nice, caricature images of people like the Wall Street Journal type stipples, and they just sent that to them. It's super cheap. It wasn't like expensive or anything, but it was like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Okay, who are you? You're an interesting person. And that's really, that skill is very similar to enterprise sales. Actually, Sam Altman had a good comment a while ago, which is that every job at its zenith basically becomes a sales job. Even if you're negotiating over arms control and you're a head of state, that's a sales job in a sense. You're trying to get $1 billion investment, that's a sales job. And so getting good at sales is really about figuring out what is the other person's mental model, what's their incentive structure, how can you add value to them, and yes, take a cut for yourself in the process, but it's actually about empathy in that deep sense. And by the way, the reason I invited this person up with the flag is because I wanted to have more pseudonymous commentators. At some point, I want somebody not in a ransom note kind of way, but to be able to do some sort of voice modulator so they can be anonymous on Clubhouse. Maybe Paul can build that into the app.
I think he's got the most interesting profile of anybody up here, he or she. I glanced the profile briefly, and it's well written. The only part that's weird in there is if you look at the person's profile, the one of the black profile, the white person with a flag, the white flag. He says in there, "Dream mentor Leo Polovets of Sousa Ventures. You'll make my year if you can intro me to him. Thank you." Well, you don't need an intro. You can just send Leo an email and just add value. Just make it really good.
I'll DM Leo right now and tell him to go and get in touch with you. All right, next person.
Yeah, exactly. Done.
All right. Thank you so much. First things first, does it worry you both about, Indian companies, the more they become global, the same problem TikTok has with user privacies and data laws? Do you think Indian companies will have the same, with dark data, surveillance states, and the lapses in security laws and privacy laws in India right now? Does that concern you at all?
I don't know enough about the Indian surveillance and privacy laws to give you a decent answer to that. Balaji, you know anything about it?
I should learn more. I think that broadly speaking, what we're probably going to want to do is move to an architecture where there's more data that's local and any data that's in the cloud is encrypted. The GDPR thing becomes obviated when data potentially is local, but we're not there yet. And so I don't have a specific answer for you, only that generic answer. Anita.
Hi, thank you again. It's a fantastic conversation. My quick question is, given the convergence of the acceleration of all of these technologies happening, that's massively driving automation, and if India starts actually, instead of using human labor, actually start going towards automation in the same way, where the full utilization of these technologies can work, what happens to the people? There's going to be a huge temporary issue the government or someone has to manage, and that could also be an opportunity. But what are your thoughts on abundance of humans who have not much utility from a skill-based perspective in the short term?
I'll take that. Yeah, I think you were clever in mentioning it's in the short term, because in the long term, it's not an issue, right? In the short term, there's always automation going on. Automation is always and everywhere happening, and it's constantly causing people to shift jobs. And the rate of change of that is accelerating. And frankly, the only way out is the same answer as always been, it's education. So we have to get past this myth that people can't be educated outside of formal schools or past a certain age. And I think the simplest solution is everybody has a phone now, and the phone is access to education. Maybe what the government could do is sort of guarantee basic minimum internet access and connectivity from a phone or a tablet, and the rest can be delivered online. Then you could literally have a small group of entrepreneurial education companies that can reskill people all the way up the stack. There's always new jobs being created. Technology and automation destroys jobs, but it replaces them with opportunities, and those opportunities are there to be creative. And the Luddite view of the world, that we're all going to be unemployed because we invented electricity or cars or steam engines or airplanes or eventually self-driving trucks or what have you, it's just always turned out to be wrong. So the burden of proof is on the people who are claiming that automation is going to steal all the jobs. It's not. It's going to replace them with opportunities. Yes, it's tough on the people who are being displaced. Yes, they have to be reskilled. But we don't have to go to 4-year universities or redo K through 12 anymore. We've got computers, we've got phones, we're all online. Everyone can be taught. The single best teacher in mathematics can teach the entire world. Salman Khan can get up there and give one lecture in math, and everyone can absorb it. Maybe it's translated, but that's about it. That leverage in teaching and education is unprecedented. It's unfathomable, and it's something that we need to get moving on. So I think that is a solution. It'll happen to some extent by itself, but definitely we can accelerate it.
Looks like I'd say one other thing, which is basically that I do think that in the medium to long term, if the 1800s was farming and the 1900s was manufacturing, I've tweeted about this, but I think that in the 2000s, in the medium to long term, the most common profession becomes, quote, investing. And that seems counterintuitive because, how can everybody make money while investing? Well, the first, millions of people are becoming investors thanks to fintech and crypto. Second, the dollar values are going down. Third is, and this is more subtle, if you think about it, much retail is basically arbitrage, where you are going and buying, let's say, a bulk order of water bottles and then selling them at some markup. And if you notice what Mr. Beast did with Mr. Beast YouTube, large YouTube following, he set up basically just a bunch of restaurants around the US and just virtualized everything and had no capital input. You can squint and you can see a future where lots of things today that require physical inventory basically become arbitrage. You're essentially making a bet that these people want water bottles today at this price and you can buy them in bulk from that price. And a lot of that can be done on the computer. So
related to that, I would add that the laws around accredited investor and that don't let people invest money until they're past a certain point, those keep people down more than almost anything else. It's basically saying you're not allowed to be a member of the capitalist class. You must remain a member of the labor class. There's no way out for you. And now that we live in a power law universe where Facebook is worth, $500 billion or $1 trillion, and number two in social networking, friend networks, you can't even know who they are because they're worthless. These are winner-take-all systems that are emerging. It would be much better if everybody was a small shareholder in Facebook when it was private, as opposed to only a few players in Silicon Valley who got to invest, and then everybody else has to wait until it goes public and it's at full value. So I think these accredited investor laws, unfortunately, keep everyone out of the capitalist class, and which means that it automatically keeps them in the labor class. Very, very counterproductive laws. All right, Pratik.
Hi. I have speaking of investing in crypto, I have a simple question. Are you more bullish about Bitcoin or ETH, and why? And a quick podcast request. I'd love to hear you talk with Kamal. Kamal, I loved your book, Love Yourself. And also, I'd love to hear a conversation with Sam Harris on philosophy and meditation. So just putting that out there.
All right,
love what you guys are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So on conversation with Kamal, that's going to happen. So stay tuned for that. Conversation with Sam Harris, I don't know, probably not. I don't do the podcast circuit much anymore. And I also don't like to talk philosophy. I know this may sound weird to people because some people seem to think I'm a philosopher. I'm just trying to be practical. I think people who engage in talking about philosophy for philosophy's sake, it's just not interesting to me. It's impractical. It's sort of like just showing off in a weird way. I love Nassim Taleb's line where he says, if you want to be a philosopher king, first become a king. My own riff on that is if you live long enough, eventually you become a philosopher. So I just think philosophy is something that's a practical output that you use for truth seeking to make your life better. So I would rather talk about very, very practical things, which is how to be happy, how to be healthy, how to make money. And out of that set, the one that I have some experience in is how to make money. So that's the one that I'm mostly into talking about. And the others are offshoots of that. I don't listen to other people's podcasts that are sitting around and philosophizing. I don't find those useful. There was a question before that as well.
I will offer one thing, which is I like Sam Harris. I like their podcast and whatnot.
I like Sam Harris, but I just don't like talking philosophy just for its own sake.
Right.
It's weird.
I think, on that topic, I think it is one of the reasons a lot of folks end up sort of sounding like philosophers or whatever on Twitter, I would argue, is because you start out and you are basically the solo engineer and you're just building everything. And then you become chief psychologist and you're managing groups of people. And at that point, people haven't changed that much in 2,000 years. And so, the classics and, this, all that type of stuff become valuable. And doing a startup is so hard that, all the stoicism type stuff where everybody wants to take a piece out of the CEO every single day. And, when it gets to the CEO's desk, if you've got 365 employees, the most important thing for them every year is, the thing that's so critical to them is now their big issue, but it's just your Monday and you have to deal with it. And so that just happens all the time. And so you start to go to this sort of Zen detachment where, this thing can take 5,000 hits a day, more than a normal person can. And that's why you start to see a lot of entrepreneurs and founders talk about philosophy.
And I have a simple solution for people who want to be philosophical. Go and get yourself almost killed. And you'll realize that, okay, nothing that you're afraid of otherwise it really matters, and there aren't really any other consequences, and it sort of chills you out. I mean, yes, startups are really hard, and I've been in very difficult situations as startups, but it's not like we're trying to avoid getting eaten by a tiger. It's not even the same level. So it's just a matter of perspective. You can get a little too obsessed, too caught up in your own mind, spinning around, ruminating, competing, and just kind of getting caught in a very small environment where you think that things that actually aren't that important are really important. Ahmed, you're up.
Memento mori.
So that's it. Memento mori. Just tattoo it on your forehead, and then look in the mirror.
Exactly. Basic question. Young people have heard this advice more than they'd like to hear, but we're encouraged to go to exciting zip codes. So traditionally, it's been a New York, an SF, a place where you find your tribe, like-minded people, all of those things. In a world that's changing and we're moving more to remote, how do you think that will play out? And just it's not a follow-up question, but also putting into perspective that a way for young people to do that has been to go to a Stanford or a Harvard or one of these places where it's more likely to get a tribe. But what do you think, in a world where we can learn everything on the internet and we can connect on Clubhouse and Twitter, how do you think that's changing, if at all? Thanks.
Yeah, I know, Balaji, you have some very specific thoughts on this topic. I mean, I think my thoughts are kind of more obvious, which is like, yeah, you can do some of it online, but it's also nice to do it offline because you maximize serendipity, especially in a world with asymmetric outcomes. So if you can expose yourself to positive asymmetries, especially early in your life, that has very good results. Magnet towns are a thing for a reason, but a lot of it is moving online.
Yeah, I think 2020 was the year. This is actually Dan Gross's one-liner that I think is actually really good. 2020 is the year that the internet really started, and my kind of riff on this is the year, or last year was the year in which the digital became primary. So everything gets done digital first and physical second. It's not that physical isn't valuable; it's that physical becomes the premium product. For example, if you have the Zoom meeting and that's the free version, and then the expensive in-person version is still valuable, but that's the paid, like $10,000 flight and multi-day stay and so on and so forth. And so everything gets done digital first, including socialization, where an in-person meeting with somebody is actually like, it's a premium product. It's something which, yeah, of course, it's still valuable. Everybody else says physical is still valuable, but physical is now the second choice. That's to say, digital is always your first choice for everything. And in any domain where that isn't true, it will become true because the cost advantages, the speed advantages are so much better. I mean, just in terms of socialization, for example, it is, I maintain, I don't know how many different contacts every day. And you just literally could not talk to that many human beings in person. But, I've got like 200 windows open. I'm just tap like this. And not in an intentional way. It's like, take a look at this link, take a look at that link. What do you think about that? This looks cool, etc. And so online is just the most efficient way of socializing. Nobody is offended if you speak to them for 3 seconds and then, go back, whereas you cannot do that in person. So I just think digital dominates and physical doesn't go away. It just becomes a premium product.
It's a good perspective. Aaron, welcome back. Long time.
Hope you guys are both well. So you both were early and right on COVID and the potential impacts. And we've seen some of these already, right? More Zoom, DoorDash, Amazon, more remote work, relocation, rapid biotech innovation. But my question is 10 to 20 years from now, what will we look back on and say this happened because of this global pandemic? What shifts are we not seeing yet in things like tech, biotech, geopolitics, financial crypto markets, etc.? You both sort of have a crystal ball. We just want to peek.
There are tons. I'll let Balaji riff on this also. He's going to have really good opinions. I think there's a combination of things. I think we're in a second global Cold War now between China and the U.S. and possibly the rest of the world kind of combining in. China's brand is not doing well. Obviously, the shift from urban areas to rural areas. I kind of say, like, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, if you're leaving a good college, you wanted to be a Wall Street socialite, going to cocktail parties, living in Manhattan, and working at an investment bank. Now you want to be a tech-enabled farmer in a rural area. You want to be living on a self-sufficient farm, working remotely, good at crypto and technology and getting everything delivered by Amazon. So just like the paradigm for how people want to live their lives has changed. Obviously, there's been huge changes in the economy is currently being floated by the Fed. The U.S. economy 1 year later looks a lot more like the Japanese economy has looked for the last 20 years, where the Bank of Japan basically owns all the assets, and now we're in a level where the U.S. Fed owns most of the assets. The transition of acceleration to crypto is very profound. It has huge consequences. The breakup of the world into different zones, just like where people get their sense of safety from, things like food sufficiency, local supply chains, bring your supply chains home. I mean, I think the repercussions are massive. People value optionality more, mobility more, the ability to exit, a lot more innovation in biotech, although I'm still kind of surprised how much we let the FDA and the CDC get away with slowing things down. So it's been shocking to me how much power the regulators and the bureaucracies have. It's been amazing to me how nonsensical the lockdowns in the West have been. Like, either do them incredibly efficiently and crush it, or don't do them at all. But kind of these really bad ones that don't actually crush the virus but crush the economy instead. Just the sheer incompetence of institutions that has been displayed over and over, ranging from the journalists, at New York Times and Recode, who called it wrong at the beginning and then piled in and, quintupled down on it later, all the way to, what the universities, what the WHO and what the CDC and so on is telling us. Tech has been vindicated. Like, Amazon delivered. Moderna's mRNA vaccine was ready 1 week in, 2 days in. It just took longer because of trials and because we don't want to do human challenge trials. So I think in a way it's been this weird repudiation of every institution that we have sort of relied upon as bedrock to the world. And it's been the acceleration of the individual, which is scary. I go back to this very prescient book. It's like 20 years old now. The Sovereign Individual. A lot of that book has come true, and I'm afraid that the remainder probably will also. It's worth checking out. I know Balaji has a lot to say on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the thing about COVID is, if you know the difference between a tidal wave versus a tsunami, a tidal wave goes and it kind of goes away, may smash some things, but goes away. Whereas a tsunami is, if you've ever seen videos of it, it's just a driving force. It just keeps plowing, and if you've ever done electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, you have this concept of like a driving force from outside that the system responds to. And the thing is, with respect to COVID, I didn't want to, people were so happy with the vaccine and whatnot, and I didn't want to, harsh anybody's mellow, so to speak. But nobody expected 10 years of Iraq, and nobody's preparing for 10 years of COVID. And what I mean by that is, it's certainly not a guarantee. It's only a possibility. But if you have a system that can't deploy a vaccine fast enough, and if one of these variants shows immune escape, because COVID is at massive scale right now. There's theoretical reasons to believe it's not going to be as mutable as, the flu, but it seems to have developed some, ability to at least mutate to spread more quickly. We don't know the fullness of this yet, but it seems that might have happened. It's at huge scale. It's going through genome space. We're only now exposing it to selection, and we're exposing it to selection in this extremely haphazard, poorly organized way, where we're giving time for it to find new variations. And I'm giving it, I'm expressing this as if it was intentional. Of course, it's natural selection. It's not intentional. There's no brain. It's a fully decentralized process. But, COVID is highly non-compliant with regulations. It's totally decentralized. It doesn't care what anybody thinks. You can't PR it. You can't knock down its morale. You can't freeze its accounts. All the tools that the Western state has to go after things are all tools that were developed to go after humans. You can't bomb COVID. So it is truly something that bypasses all the things that made America a superpower. And in fact, I think that in the fullness of time, people are going to look and say 1945 to 2020, that 75-year period, 2020 is what ended America's reign as the global superpower for a bunch of reasons. One of which is, there's a Rolling Stone article actually that's pretty good from mid-late 2020, where I talked about how, this was the first time the rest of the world was looking at the United States with pity. People had looked at the U.S. with anger or other kinds of things, but, aid was being sent to the U.S. Normally, you have something where there's videos of brawny Marines when there's a hurricane or a natural disaster of some kind, brawny Marines getting off a helicopter and handing out relief things and so on. And you think of that as such a obvious staple that you don't even realize that was actually that required some reserve of competence. But that's no longer there. The U.S. is completely over its skis. It doesn't know how to deal with this. It is true that technology has filled the gap. While every legacy institution failed, every East Coast institution failed, reporters failed and regulators failed, national, state, and local failed, police failed, public health failed, fire failed, and even schools failed, especially in California. All of those things have failed, but you did have Amazon delivering packages, and you had teleconferencing and Zoom, and you had Google Meet, you had DoorDash, you had obviously Twitter and so on. To while it certainly had its own Civil War aspects, it also delivered good information. And so the technological system stood up as all the legacy systems failed. And it's not over. COVID really, my friend Yaniv Ehrlich, who's a genomics professor at the Whitehead now, a software entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur, genomics entrepreneur. He's in Israel. He's like, this was just the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. So I think that's a huge thing, and the fullness of it, it's not even over yet. We're still in the middle of it. It may just drag on for years and years and years, and we may look at the vaccine as like a premature mission accomplished. What's going to happen potentially is the entire Western biomedical system will have to change to allow a deployment of a vaccine that gets within the OODA loop of the virus. OODA loop is like observe, orient, decide, act, this concept from, I believe, John Boyd in the military, where if you can just react faster than your enemy can, you get inside their OODA loop while they're still turning, you've already gone behind them and blown them up, And so...
To Balaji's point, I think the FDA and the CDC were more complicit in the spread of this virus than we kind of blame them for, right? The problems seem to trail all the way back to, there's still been no good investigation of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is completely closed off and was carrying 8 different bat viruses. I'm not saying this thing was made in the lab, but they had 8 different viruses that looked a lot like it in that lab. Can we at least go take a look? When this thing got released, the FDA and the CDC bungled the test kits, and it prevented private industry from rolling out test kits for the longest time. And then on the vaccine itself, we didn't do challenge trials, which would accelerate the vaccine. And as Balaji is saying, if the thing mutates pretty quickly, which I don't think it will. Normally when these things mutate, I'm not a virologist, but normally when they mutate for greater infectiousness but lower fatality. So they because the virus wants to live too, so it kind of tends to chill out. Not always true, but directionally true. And this virus has some error correction in the RNA. So, more like Spanish flu didn't keep coming back over and over again. Then again, it is possible because we're creating selection pressures through 1 dose of a 2-dose vaccine and so on and so forth. But anyway, if that does happen, then I think we're really going to want to get rid of the FDA because that's the thing that's in the way that's preventing us from doing very fast turnarounds. Again, the Moderna vaccine was ready in less than a week. And in fact, now it's taking us a long time to manufacture these things, but it's because we've been manufacturing them to a fail-safe spec that works in peacetime. We're not doing wartime manufacturing where we're like, okay, this thing will work 99.9% of the time, and maybe some of the time it'll just be ineffective. But because we can tolerate zero loss, because we have bureaucrats and regulators everywhere, as Balaji is saying, our OODA loop is too long compared to what a virus could have. Anyway.
Let me offer just a couple of thoughts on that. Zeynep Tufekci, maybe mispronouncing it, but Zeynep and I, we've talked a fair bit over the course of the pandemic. She had a good article in The Atlantic. One of her points is that a virus that evolves to be more transmissible, it gets to an even larger scale. And so it's parallel processing and searching more combinations in genome space. So that's actually quite dangerous in some ways. Even if it's just like a simple thing that gets to huge scale can actually be very big, right? And so that's one issue. The second thing is I offer one slight edit, which is absolutely we need a way outside the FDA, but the thing that they're not concerned about is if somebody just says abolish the FDA. It's sort of like Ron Paul saying end the Fed. It's something that's emotional. It's got a directional accuracy, but it's also unrealistic because the entire system is built around the Fed or the FDA. And so you've got like millions of backlinks that are pointing into the central hub. So that just means chaos if you just remove it. However, what does work is something similar to what worked with Bitcoin, which is exit the Fed, exit the FDA. So allow people to opt out. Now, the thing is, this actually already exists in many forms. For example, there's many pathways outside the FDA, right to try laws to allow you to use drugs. In fact, the very first patient in the U.S. that was treated in the AGM with COVID, I believe they were to get remdesivir under a right to try exemption that hasn't been well documented, but reading between the lines, it looks like that happened. Another example, CLIA labs and laboratory developed tests are a pathway outside the FDA, so you don't have to submit a 510K for a new, genomic assay, for example. Compounding pharmacies, that's a way of, getting drugs without going through an FDA process. They don't like that. Off-label prescription by MDs, you can prescribe a drug for a purpose, a drug that's been approved for purpose A can be prescribed for purpose B without going through another, FDA process. And then most importantly, countries which aren't harmonized with FDA. The harmonization problem is actually the most important problem to solve in all of technology, because with Uber or Airbnb, first of all, what does harmonization mean? Let me define that. If you're a small company, you might outsource your login to Facebook. And if you're a small country, you might outsource your regulation to the USA and just adopt the same regulations that the FDA or the FAA or the SEC has put in place. And, maybe with some tweaks you translate or whatever, but that's why people talk about, the Czechoslovakian FDA or the Polish SEC. They have local analogs of these American agencies. This is one of the most important ways by which the U.S. has a global hammerlock on innovation. The reason that's important is most bureaucrats who are employed at these agencies are not actually subject to either elections or markets. That is to say, they weren't elected and can't be fired. They have career tenure. There's something called the Douglas factors, which you can Google, which show the mechanisms by which you actually have to get through to terminate a federal bureaucrat. It's actually very, very difficult. It's sort of like the Miranda rights, except rather than the right to remain silent, if somebody is put up for being fired, for example, they just get a 90-day suspension. If it's a 90-day suspension, it's just a slap on the wrist. That means the manager who tries to go and terminate them is actually the bad guy, because everybody's looking at him as, how come you tried to get, Jim fired? Jim is still in the office. It's just a weird, awkward situation. So nobody ever gets fired. And that means that if you're running the agency, you're not actually able to terminate anybody or hire anybody. So you're not really even running the agency. It's the inmates have taken over the asylum. So in this fashion, you have these career employees that are anonymous, that aren't elected, can't be fired, that then have a global hammerlock over regulation. And this is really the important question. Why didn't other countries do challenge trials? Why didn't other countries accelerate? And I think the answer is that they haven't philosophically gotten outside the matrix on this yet. They haven't realized actually the U.S. doesn't know what it's doing. It is no longer a model for the world. We shouldn't emulate the U.S. in the systems that we have. We need to think about this from first principles. The U.S. has one of the worst COVID outbreaks in the world. And so, like at least any of the East Coast institutions, they may have been good things to model on, a generation ago, but they're not competent today. And so we need to reassess everything. And I think this will eventually break harmonization where countries start to go their own way. And the reason I say it's the most important problem in technology is if you've got something that's regulated at the local level, well, like Uber or Lyft or Airbnb, if something is regulated in Austin, well, then you can go and you can ship Uber in Miami. If it's regulated in LA, then you can go and ship it in Dallas, and you have jurisdictional choice at the city level. Okay, well then what about if something's regulated at the national level? All right, then you can go between countries. But if it's harmonized, then you have a global monopoly of regulation over the entire world, and then that's something that's very hard to break, right? Now, the fact that the U.S. has just face planted to such an extent is actually something which in the medium to long term, I think has good consequences only in the sense that a lot of other countries start taking a different tack on regulation. And so you start seeing aircraft that the FAA would not allow. You start seeing crypto stuff that the SEC would try to hold back. You start seeing biomedicine that the FDA would hold back. And we already see some of this. Another aspect of this that's happening is, these agencies were sort of set up in the middle of the 20th century, and they sort of assume that the actor on the other side is a gigantic company. For example, the FDA thinks it's dealing with Pfizer and Merck, and the FAA is going after Boeing and Airbus, and the SEC is talking to Goldman and JP Morgan. But what they're not set up to do, the FDA is not set up to deal with 1 million people with personal genomes. The FAA is not set up to go after 1 million people with personal drones, and the SEC is not set up to go after 1 million crypto users. And the thing about this is it actually puts the lens on the other side of the transaction, not on the big bad company that this regulatory agency is ostensibly trying to protect you from, but on the individual whose rights they are restricting. Now, it's not that they haven't restricted those rights historically. If you look at the case of Cohen versus the United States, for example, the FDA has actually banned people from taking experimental medications for a long time. But now with social media, with more people aware of this, I think we're going to get a breakthrough on this. And that's one of the most important consequences of the 2020s and maybe 2030s is that regulatory harmonization is finally broken.
All right. Get Balaji talking about COVID and the FDA people. I don't know if most of you know, but Balaji was actually in the running to run the FDA, and I think they made a big mistake by not begging him to do it. It would have literally saved lots of lives. But
I could have taken a position, but there are a lot of reasons I decided not to do it, and it's one of those things more easily than from the inside. That's my strong belief.
Yeah, the closer I get to government, the further I want to be from it. Sharad, you're up. Exactly. We're going to do lightning round. 30 seconds.
Hey, everyone.
30-second responses. Balaji, we're going to limit our responses 30 seconds each, too.
Absolutely.
It's Twitter time. Go, Sharad.
Balaji, to your point on internet in 2020 and Naval, your recommendation about sovereign individual, I wanted to ask, internet has made possibly a dramatic extension of markets, blurring the borders of nation states. The underlying logic of violence is changing as well in terms of pandemic hitting up and clubbed with internet. In that light, what are your thoughts about denationalization of an individual through increasing autonomy? And if this really happens, would that start in the West, followed by India, or simultaneously across the whole world?
Well, I think that's a great question, which is basically what you're asking is how do you become a sovereign individual and where do you start? And, the book Sovereign Individual actually has a pretty good playbook. Balaji has written a lot on this too, so I'll let him take over for most of this answer, but you can start wherever you are. Balaji, why don't you give your playbook? I know you've thought about this a lot.
I think a very simple playbook. Measure your personal runway. Your personal runway is your savings divided by your burn rate. Most people think about increasing their income. Most people do not think about reducing their burn rate. And if you're willing to live like an academic, or you're willing to live like an early stage startup, the best way to reduce your burn rate is to find the cheapest place in the world that you're willing to live and then to move there. Teleport.org and nomadlist.com both have lists of these places. You can calculate it out. Obviously, COVID does complicate this because you're going to need, there's costs of tests and so on both ends. Immigration and so on is non-trivial. This was an easier thing to do in the pre-COVID world in some ways. But I think that, as vaccines come online, a lot of these countries are going to need financial immigrants to replace their tourism. And so I think that the personal runway model is a very important model, both saving in place and moving overseas to cut costs.
Rahul, you're up.
Hey, thanks for having me. My question is, as India goes through a transformation over the next 5 to 10 years, how do you think about the growth of tier 1, 2, and 3 cities? Tier 1 cities like Mumbai and Bengaluru, they might have a higher cost of living, ton of pollution, quality of life in general isn't great. So how do you anticipate innovation and startup growth in these cities? And normatively, how do you think the Indian government should be thinking about cultivating different centers for innovation in India?
Yeah, Yeah, well, good news is physical matters less than it used to just because of COVID, the remote work transition, and everyone using Zoom, etc. Still matters, still helps. One interesting thing I think about this San Francisco Bay Area is people talk about like what are all the reasons that innovation took off there or coalesced there, and they'll talk about universities like Stanford and Berkeley. They'll talk about Shockley Semiconductor was there, and Intel, and Cisco, etc. It's kind of these founding companies. They'll talk about a lot of things. One thing they don't mention is that it used to be, now obviously San Francisco is changing, but it used to be just a very, very pleasant place to live. The geography makes it very pleasant. That part's not changing. The weather makes it very pleasant. That's not changing. The agriculture is amazing. So the food there is incredible. The views are great. And you had a lot of creative people. So it was actually, for a long time, one of the most pleasant places to live on planet Earth. In fact, if you sort of were to basically spend some time trying to analyze where the best weather is in the United States, you'll very quickly realize that California has a monopoly on all the warm, dry coastline in the United States. So I don't think that's a coincidence. And it's because tech workers are the most leveraged workers in the world. They can out-earn almost anybody else as a class. So they're going to, ceteris paribus, all other things equal, they're going to congregate in an area where it's actually very, very pleasant to live. So I think Mumbai and Delhi may have certain advantages just from critical mass and being large, but I wouldn't be surprised if the winning geography, if there is such a thing anymore in a post-COVID world, ends up being the one that is just physically very pleasant to be in. All right. Unless Balaji wants to say something, we can go to Aditya.
Yeah,
go for it.
Very quick. So I think that it's a combination of things. With Teleport, we built a search engine for your location, and so weather is a factor, but regulation is a factor, and obviously like stability of the climate is a factor, and so on and so forth. Like are there lots of fights and communal violence, or is it more stable? So all those things kind of combine, and you'll have a different objective function as like a single person who's doing a company versus an executive with a scale company versus somebody who's got kids and married and later in life. So I think all those things combine. I will say that the most important thing is the Bay Area is no longer the monopoly. And that I don't think is ever going to come back. And so you don't have to start in Silicon Valley, and then that changes everything. It's sort of like Microsoft's monopoly being broken. Yeah, it still might be a rich and powerful company, but it's not able to have the veto anymore.
All right. Next.
Hey, thanks. Go. Okay.
Aditya.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. So my question is on the role of regulators and government in either empowering so these sort of fundamental payment techniques, right? So basically, we saw that Bitcoin was approved by OCC regulators to be used in banks, and similarly, what the Indian government has done with UPI, and that has given it a huge boost. So my question is, how should governments handle this so that it benefits the people the most?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is like regulate it less. Make crypto part of the economy. Stop trying to apply laws for that were done 70, 80 years ago to prevent widows and orphans from getting scammed, to now stop smart contracts. Like this new treasury rule that's rolling out in the United States, they tried to sneak in over the 2-week Christmas break, which basically now wants to KYC so-called unhosted wallets. Is just nonsense. It'll break DeFi contracts and it'll cause what little remains of the crypto industry in the US to flee overseas. So I guess the easy answer is to say they shouldn't get in the way. That said, this is a little bit of a useless conversation topic. It's not like you and I can change the government's outcome on this, right? They don't listen to us. So really, as an individual, you just have to route around. And I think our brain cells are better spent trying to figure out still how to make it work despite all the opposition. Look, if the regulators weren't in opposition to crypto fundamentally, then Bitcoin would already be worth trillions and trillions of dollars today. But the so-called final boss is that at the end of the day, the state, the biggest regulatory moat that protects an industry is around Wall Street and associated financial institutions all around the world. They have captured regulators more efficiently than anyone else has. And the reason why crypto was kind of the most recent platform to arrive on the internet is because it's taking on the hardest job. It's taking on the hardest job of breaking through the state regulatory enforced monopoly that protects financial institutions and financial transactions the way they are today. And a smart regulator, which, let's see if there is such a thing, will realize, hey, if we are good to this ecosystem, then it's going to take root here. And it's a global ecosystem. Any country that takes a forward-looking stance with crypto has a very good shot at becoming the financial ecosystem for the entire planet. How powerful would that be? Just imagine, like, if you're a small country today and you decide that your currency, has lost value, people don't trust it anymore, and you can adopt the dollar as your reserve currency, which is what most of the world really does. But what's the effect of that? The effect of that is that when Donald Trump or Joe Biden needs to buy votes, they shake down the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve prints trillions and trillions of dollars, and 70% of dollars are held by people overseas. That's what it means to be a reserve currency. So 70% of the inflationary effect, or the dilution in the value of the dollar, is borne by people overseas. So the U.S. gets to print its way out of problems, and 70% of that bill is paid by foreigners, which is a fantastic position to be in. But let's suppose some country wises up to this and says, we don't want to be in that situation. We're going to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. But if they're smart, before they do that, they just go and buy up a whole bunch of Bitcoin. They don't actually adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. They use their local currency, but they back it with Bitcoin, just like you could have backed it in the past with gold. So they could buy up a whole bunch of Bitcoin and then announce, oh, by the way, our currency is now Bitcoin backed. You know what would happen when they do that? Bitcoin would skyrocket, and they would end up being the richest country in the world. It's not that hard, people. It's just simple game theory. But let's see if someone's smart enough to pull that off.
I think also, I agree with a lot of that, actually almost all of that. I'd say 2 or 3 things. One is, I think it'll probably start with sovereign funds first, because they're sort of set up to do it. And now that you've got enough billionaires and large funds establishing large positions in BTC, a lot of the, quote, taboo or the weirdness of it has gone away. And so you're going to get more and more companies, tech companies first. Square obviously, is a big early Bitcoin believer and put in a chunk of their treasury in, but more and more companies are establishing positions and then announcing it. Naval's point is actually a very important one. I've also talked about this. The whole concept of printing trillions of dollars is actually an implicitly very nationalist policy by the U.S. because you're diluting down the rest of the world to prop up the U.S. It's like a welfare state in a different sense of the world. Everybody who's using dollars is basically propping up the U.S. And, in the sense that, Saudi Arabia's export is oil, America's export, their biggest export is now dollars. And the thing is that the dollar is a technology platform, and there's 2 major competing technology platforms that are coming. One of them is crypto, of course, and the second is actually China's public blockchain that they're doing, or whether it's actually a blockchain, let's call it a digital currency, the digital yuan that they're doing, which looks like it's being built in a very intelligent and determined way. They're definitely very serious about it. And so then both of those payment systems are coming online as things that are just superior to the legacy SWIFT environment. And I think that the U.S. is very, for lack of a better term, arrogant about it, where they really think that their leverage is so much that they can just, print all the money, deplatform people left and right, and that there will never be any alternatives because USA number one. I don't think that's true. And I think that both crypto capital and, quote, communist capital are going to be checking woke capital on this, and we're going to see what happens.
Well, the USA is like an empire, but instead of extracting tribute through, basically going and shaking down local governments and taking their gold and bringing it back home, it's by forcing them to take dollars in exchange for, goods and services. And not forcing them, but kind of creating a system where the dollar is the most reliable thing that you hold on to. But it is backed up in some sense by guns. And eventually there will come a day when the rest of the world will say, actually, we'll hold a basket of something else. It might be cryptocurrencies, it might be a basket of other currencies, commodities, what have you. And when that day happens, then the U.S. is going to be a lot poorer. And one of the big effects of COVID, because earlier Aaron asked, what are the big repercussions of COVID? One of those is that date, whatever that date is, has been pulled in by 5 to 10 years. Because now both parties in government have decided they want to print money. As most of you probably know, in the Georgia Senate runoffs today were won by the Democrats, or basically won by the Democrats. So we have one-party rule for the next few years, which is never good for markets and will probably also result in a lot of money printing. So it's not, it's not so much right now that crypto is booming. Yes, crypto is booming, but it's just as much true that it's the dollar is devaluing. And we're seeing that by financial assets are just skyrocketing. People are looking for safe havens from the dollar. That exodus has begun. And that's kind of a scary thing. When I see Bitcoin go up, I don't necessarily always feel great about it. It's like if you see your life insurance policy going up in value, right? You kind of hesitate and pause like, oh, good, my life insurance policy is worth more. Wait a minute. Not necessarily always good. So let's see what happens. Himanshu, you're the last caller. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for pulling me up. So I have, in fact, a utilitarian question for both of you. Have you guys been able to solve the problem of time zone difference while you're working with your remote teams?
I love it. Very practical, and Balaji has the solution for you. Fantastic. We end on a practical note.
So, extremely important question. I don't know if there is a full solution yet, but the most obvious thing is you have time zone managers, right? That's to say, you basically only hire from, and you have folks report to folks who are within their time zone plus or minus 3 hours. And you identify a few jurisdictions in the world that are both good from a regulatory and climate and whatever perspective, and also from a time zone perspective. For example, those might turn out to be Costa Rica, Mauritius, Dubai, and Singapore, just to pick, 4 kinds of things. I think that's how it's going to work is you're going to have time zone managers, and any remote team, you're going to want to be able to do simultaneous. And so that's going to be a cut that's going to be in everybody's, Twitter profile or Slack profile rather, to figure out, who they can manage.
By personality type, a lot of engineer types are night owls anyway. I know I'm a night owl, so
that's also true. But if you want to do a coordinated session, it's useful to be able to be on the same time zone.
For sure. Well, we made this work. We're all in very different time zones. So thank you all for coming, for spending your afternoon or your evening or your late night with us, whichever it might be. And we hope to see you again soon. Any final words, Balaji?
That's it. Hope everybody likes stuff. We'll tweet out a few of the best questions. And if you didn't have a chance, you can just reply to me on Twitter and we might RT some. Thanks, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.